working vacation, went back down into the central, 40 for a few days, did some champs, did some cycling, did some work in the community, established a few little things, and back in the place again. So this evening we won't have a guest. I'm going to just take a few minutes to talk about a subject which is dear and close to our collective hearts, and that is sports. But I'm not going to talk about it in a sense that we're going to identify any particular sport. I'm just going to give a general idea that has been floating around in my head for many years, and hopefully get a concrete proposition for the long haul. So as a youth, French Avenue, small little place. My first introduction to sports wasn't really at infant school when you run a little race in my sports day, you know, or even just running up and down French Avenue or Smart Road or Summerstone Road. My first introduction to sports actually was listening to and a little RCO, like a red and white RCA radio my brother used to have in what we call the living room. It had a little record player on top, and it had the radio, the AM portion. I never really have FM at that time. It was kind of rediffusion, a redirecting of signals through RJR. So, you know, with the time difference, when West Indies play in England or Australia, that time India and Pakistan also really wasn't big in the scene. India was just coming up in the 60s, but mostly England and Australia. We used to wake up early in the morning, bro. We used to wake up early. So we never really have a choice but to listen to the games because the place small and the radio loud and the transmission bad, so enough buzzing and enough noise. So we used to listen to the games. And this is when West Indies was pretty much at their prime, or building up to a prime. We are talking about Seymour Nurse, we are talking about Garfield Sobers, we are talking about Basil Butcher, we are talking about Lance Gibbs, you know. And then you had men like Alvin Kalicharan and Clive Lloyd and Holding and so on later on with Viv Richards and Greenwich and Andy Roberts and Curtly Ambrose and so on. But this was later on in the 70s, 80s. But prior to that, nobody could beat the West Indies, even when them and tie back at them and them foot tie up together and them wear leather, them wear concrete shoes. Nobody in the world could beat the West Indies and the worst of their days. I mean, I talk about the days when man like Sobers had a double century, like it's just a run of the mill. Nobody could beat them. What happened? What happened was Australia went back to the drawing board. And Australia was one of those countries. Remember now, people who settled in Australia came from England primarily. Many of whom were, you know, history have it written in so to speak. But they started to develop their own product in the 60s. And them cricket and them rugby. But as far as cricket was concerned, they were inferior to the West Indies. And they decided that in an effort to have a development process for young sportsmen in Australia, and this would encompass tennis, rugby, soccer, what we call football, and many other sports are undertaken, table tennis, as a matter of fact, and even netball. And what they did was just in the same manner that we would identify youngsters in the infant school and the primary schools from them early days of them exploits as athletes and so on. When they were entering high schools, what they would do is identify some of their skill sets, not all, but some of their fundamental skill sets, along with whatever recommendation from their parents and even themselves as students. Because by this time you're 10, 11, 12 years old going into high school. And what they built were academies, sporting academies. So by the time you turned 17 or 18 years old, however, they were able to graduate high school and become functioning individuals within their society because they by this time identified the fact that they were not able to exploit their athletic abilities. Members of society, productive members of the society, whether they were masseurs, sport administrators, coaches, or just ball boys working in the field, learning the ropes as to how they can fit in the sporting endeavor. However, they left school with the ability to read and write. And what we are seeing in the Jamaican context, not in general, but the numbers don't lie. a high percentage of the youths who graduate high school in general, not sports in particular, a high percentage don't have one C6 subject. A lot of them are functionally illiterate and they don't have anything to hang on to. So my thought was, and I've been holding on to this thought forever, but I don't have the planning, I don't have the logistics, I don't have the curriculum development, I don't have the money, I don't have any of those things, but just a thought, just an idea, is that many of the high schools or many of the secondary schools that were transformed into high schools that are still at this point in time at failing levels could have easily, within the 3 counties of Jamaica, Cornwall, Middlesex, and Surrey, we could do bricklaying. Some people have put up roofs. The man who's the architect in Naval Air Shingle, you know, the draftsman is not going to put up a drywall. So you have an all-encompassing part of developing a developing nation. So my idea is primarily, how do we figure out a way how we can build sporting academies to not just encompass sporting endeavors, but when the youths ready to graduate high school or want to go on to tertiary institutions or they want to build their lives at 18, 19 years old, where they're now young adults and they can start their lives, they can have children, they can build a home and so on. But they have a skill set that they can become productive members of society. Because one of the things that I remember clearly in 1998, when Reggae Boys went on to represent this part of the this part of the Caribbean in sports. We have never done well in soccer, we have never done in cricket. We have done relatively well on the world stage in netball. But in terms of individual sports, we have excelled. I remember now, you know, it's not just today we are excel in athletics, you know. From the Arthur Wins to the McKinleys to the DJ Johnsons. Remember now, DJ was a man who broke the world 100-yard record in the early 60s, you know, long before he was even recognized as a sporting figure in Jamaica, you know. Remember now. And then you had the Usain Bolts, you had the Donald Quarries and so on. So you had the Burt Camerons who went on to the Olympics and many, many too. You see these stories, these documentaries on next week's. Whatever happened to? Where are they now? And you hear all kind of sad stories, whether it is a question of how they handle finances or whatever. So my primary idea is while we look at how in Port Antonio, where Titchfield and so on were in the 60s and the 70s with girls' champs and soccer and so on, the numbers don't lie. We have never really had high achievers. We have had people come out of the system who have done relatively well, who got scholarships and so come to the States and get a decent education and are giving back to society now still. But we must understand that the only thing in this life that remains the same, the only thing in this life that remains the same is change. Life is a roller coaster. It goes up, it goes down. As the old saying goes, today for me, tomorrow for you. Every hoe of them kick a bush. Trust me, there's nothing that remains constant other than change itself. While you listen to that carefully, change is the only thing remain constant. So as we go through our lives and we make a big deal about where we are with this program and that program and so on, my fundamental thought is if we're going to harness talents within our community without a Carter Park or down a Bombrook, without a Norwich out a Long Bay, without a Happy Grove or Priestman's Valley, without a Swift River, Walk Bay with a cricket pitch, without a Folly with a cricket pitch, down a Bombrook with a cricket pitch, without a Great Zine with a cricket pitch. Wherever the cricket pitch or the football field, we'll still just have these little anecdotal references as to the one man who come out of the community who spark. But we don't want to have the stories as to where are they now? But we have to reminisce and I say, boy, you remember that youth there? So I'm just saying that to kind of just remind us that we have to kind of put our lives in perspective. And while we get up in arms about where certain entities are in terms of their achievements, you know, we are still relatively privileged. For the most part, a high percentage of us are literate. A high percentage of us are still able to understand some of the complexities of life. And we came out of a system, remember now, back in the 60s and 70s, even up until the parts of the 80s, government used to undertake pretty much every aspect of school activity, you know. But when I say every aspect, from underwater basket weave to crochet, to table tennis, to money football, to cricket, to athletics. And for the most part, the youths who come out of the schools used to have to provide so used to get everything provided for them. Except maybe them got a little pocket, them parents give them a pocket money when they go to town, or they go to Montego Bay, or they go to Manchester or something. But the government used to undertake pretty much a transportation. So one of the important things is we must figure out a way how we can give back, but give back in a constructive way and not just tear down what is there. Tear down just for the sake of tearing down and prop up the people who we feel we're going to best suit our own selfish needs. But I become administrators at the high school level, but the youths who are going into tertiary institution can make a decision. Am I good enough to move on to a higher level of athletic achievement? Whatever sports it is. Because man play very high level of table tennis, man play very high level of soccer, man play very high level of cricket. But you must be able to have the tools in place. And those tools can be put in place from age 11, 12, 10, 11, 12. When you come out of primary school, because scouting is done. The big schools do scouting. And you're not going to be able to take away from what the big schools do in terms of their money. Because the big schools in the urban centers where the big money is, you're not going to change much of that, you know. But for a lot of the rural areas where the money is not turning over at the level where it's turning over in the urban centers, we must figure out a way as a nation how we can create a development process where the Premier League or the Melbourne cricket clubs of the world, now if you have struggled from year to year to find time, same place, and the prime of, we're going to, and I'll go tease up towards it next week. But we're going to just keep it very light, very funny. That primarily the school structure is set up for learning, and learning is not only academic learning. So there's the life learning, the sports, and so on and so forth. So, having said that, please consider how much it is important for us to give back to our communities. And with that, I'll just take the opportunity to say thank you all for tuning in and being patient over the last couple of weeks when I was away. And look forward to next week when I bring along 2 excited to share our half an hour. Again, walk good. And take it easy. I have some stories to tell about my experience last couple of weeks in Jamaica, though. I tell you, why not pretty? Some, pretty in such a way, but just remember this: life's stumbling blocks can be actually stepping stones. Take it easy.